So here's the thing that no one wants you to know. Excellent service can save a bad meal, but an excellent meal can be ruined by bad service. We think it's time that the front of the house got the spotlight they deserve. Welcome to Dine Dish, where the business of dining meets the art of hospitality. All right, everybody, we are back for another episode of Dine and Dish, and I have a very exciting guest today. I know I say this every week that I have an exciting guest, but I really bring on amazing guests. And this week, I'm super excited. John Opdahl and I have worked together for a very long time, and we're going to talk buying power, food contracts, margins, which is so important in the restaurant industry. And it's such a area that I really think gets um, not as much attention that it needs to, because obviously we talked a little bit with Joe last week about what is so important with tight margins and just overall cost control and the bottom line and the numbers. And one of those controllables is buying power. So we're going to jump right into the show today, and let me introduce John Opdahl. I'm not going to say where he worked prior, but he is the founder of Restaurant Consulting LLC, and he's here with me today. And welcome, John.
Hey, Michelle, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Of course. We've been doing a lot of cool stuff lately, haven't we?
Yeah,
Reality
real fun.
TV, podcast. I'm jumping you right into the world of TV, radio, everything, huh?
I know. Getting me out of my comfort zone.
Well, that's okay. I used to do that to Stevio too. So Steve in the office, the first time he did the podcast with me, he was like, you have to give me an agenda and give me some, like, you need to let me prepare.
Right.
So before we jump right into such an important topic in the restaurant industry, let's talk Christmas. What are you doing for the holidays?
Oh, exciting plans. We're going to Aruba next week. We'll be there over the holidays.
What? Okay. So you're not going to
Yeah.
have a snowy Christmas, that's for sure.
No, it's going to be probably 80 degrees every day, sunny. Yeah, I'm very excited. I'm ready. After this little cold snap we've had here, I'm very excited to get into a warmer location, at least for a little bit.
Wow, I'm jealous. We were just literally talking about that we need beach, sun, vitamin D, and warm weather.
Yeah.
And you're getting all of the above.
Ugh, can't wait. It's gonna be
So are
fun.
you doing Christmas Day there too?
Yeah, we'll be down there for that, and it just sounds like from my research, everything's pretty much open. So just my wife and I, no family. Did that for Thanksgiving up in Connecticut. So now
Wow.
it's
Sometimes they say that's might be better.
I,
Sometimes less is more. I know they say the more the merrier, but
yeah,
sometimes less is always more.
I think in this case that's probably true. We've never like gone. I don't think we've ever done anything but skiing during this time. Normally this week we're somewhere skiing during the winter break. My wife works in a school, and this is like, you get time off when you get it off, right? So we
Yeah. Well,
usually
it,
go skiing, but
it's really funny because my brother's actually going to Aruba too. I think he's leaving the day after Christmas, but it's just, I
oh,
guess everybody's running to Aruba.
it's a lovely island.
Yeah, that's what I hear. That's what
They
I
call it.
hear.
They call
Well,
it the Happy Island.
yeah. Well, let's jump into our episode today. So this is such a huge topic, especially we've worked together for such a long time, and you've had the experience of working with so many large vendors and small vendors and supply chain and contracting and rebate optimization and all these big words that go into what really matters into this whole conversation today and why it's important to restaurant operators. So, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit, talk a little bit about what you're doing now in a
Yeah,
consulting role, and then we'll kind of get into the whole power of purchasing.
that sounds great. So just a little background. So I grew up a little bit in the industry. My family had a was involved in a restaurant up in New York when I was growing up, and I feel like I was just always in it. So when I got done with college, I just gravitated into it. So I have a lot of experience in actual working in restaurants, but
So, like from the
more,
operation side. So, I'm
yeah,
sure
from the
that,
operation side.
yeah.
For a short time, we owned a restaurant locally, and for the last 30 years, more or less, I've worked in distribution. So all on the sales side, Cisco, US Foods. In the last 12 years, I worked as an executive there. So really leaning on that experience now to help growing concepts. That's sort of the sweet spot where I'm trying to focus my attention. People that
Right.
you're not quite ready to have a full-time purchasing person, but also they've reached a scale where they can really take advantage of their buying power, and believe it or not, they're not going to get told that they're at that level. So
Exactly.
I try to
Well,
step in and help where I can.
yeah. So you actually brought up a really good point. Understanding the power of purchasing. Because everybody always says, well, it might not be big enough. Well, what is big enough? Is it an
Right.
independent restaurant operator? Is it a multi-unit operator? How does that differ? And then, where do so let's kind of talk about the largest misconception that restaurant owners have actually about purchasing. And then, where you feel operators really leave money on the table when it comes to buying power.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, from a misconception standpoint, I think people believe that, um, when they're buying from a vendor, that everybody's paying the same thing,
Right.
and the truth is, they're just not. There's been a term that I've heard thrown around out there in the industry, the willingness to pay, and that's an interesting term, right? So you have sales reps out there, and depending on what your willingness to pay is and how aware you are of pricing and if you're paying attention to it or not, you sort of have to navigate that the best you can, right? So what are you going to compare pricing to?
Right.
And then also understanding that, as a buyer, you have a very different agenda as a restaurant owner than the distributor does. Their agenda is to make as much money for the company as possible, and your agenda as a restaurant operator is to keep your costs low and save as much money as you can.
And make as much money as you can for the restaurant.
Right. So you're at you're competing, with these different agendas, and while it's great to have a really good relationship with your distributor, with your vendor, and that's really important. We could talk about that at some point, but you're still running a business, right? And you need to be very cognizant of that, as you're looking at who you're buying from and how you're doing it.
Yeah. So let me ask you a question. So a lot of restaurants have multi vendors and partners. So you have your food vendors, you have your produce vendors, you have your bread vendors, you have your chemical, your paper. I mean, there's so many different purveyors out there where you can buy. And then you have your large ones, like you said, like US Food and Cisco and PFG and a lot of these larger ones. So what do you feel in terms of consolidating vendors? Does it make sense from a buying position? And we should talk buying power, what that truly
Yeah.
means.
Yeah.
But, you know, it doesn't make sense to try to consolidate to get better buying power, or does that hurt your buying power? Because now, it's what do they say? If you have, they hold all the power and you can't control the cost analysis as much. So what do you feel about that?
So my general thought is consolidation is always better within reason, right? There'll always be some things that you might not be able to consolidate, right? Depending on your menu type, you may have some, specific niche kind of items that you have to buy from certain vendors. But generally speaking, I think consolidation's good. Let's just think about it this way. Let's
Yeah.
just say you have say you have four vendors, right? They're delivering twice a week. And so that's eight total deliveries you have coming in your door. And this is where it's kind of good to understand how distributors make money and how they work.
Hmm.
If you move that to one distributor, right? Let's just say the four vendors are all making $50. They got to make $50 in profit, right? To get that truck on the street, to make it worthwhile, to make their delivery. Well, if there's eight deliveries across those four vendors two times a week, that's $400 in profit, right? Well,
Hmm.
if you made that one vendor, and even if you let them deliver three times a week, right? And even if they made $75 a week in profit, that's $225. So you've saved money right there. So just understanding generally that everybody that's delivering to you has to make money. you're diluting your purchasing power by spreading it out. And again, understanding that there's times you have to do that for various
Mhm.
reasons, but you want to keep it tight because your purchasing power is really in the total spend and the total number of dollars you can bring in from a vendor.
Yeah. So, um, let's talk. You just mentioned something interesting, and before we started the show, we were actually talking about this, but the whole truck delivery, fuel, all these different pieces that go into an invoice. I mean,
Yeah.
we talk about how we can help the bottom line. So, I mean, I say this all the time. The restaurant industry is so tough because the margins aren't the way they used to be. And, back in the day, it was mostly cash. There wasn't a lot of credit cards. You made 30, 40% profit. And then now costs are going up everywhere. I mean, in terms of fuel, truck charges, minimum orders. I mean, it's just crazy. I mean, how as a restaurant, if you're the small guy, not these large conglomerates, but as a small guy, how do you control those costs?
Yeah, well, I mean, you bring up fuel, right? So that's an interesting thing. Everybody seems to have a fuel surcharge on their invoices now. I
That's
try to
something
think
new,
back
John.
and
That's
see.
something really new. I think that's only what, 2, 3 years that they've been doing that, because I don't
Yeah,
remember back in the day when we started seeing fuel charges.
I feel like back in maybe even like 10 years ago when we first had a big fuel crisis where it went up a lot.
Hmm.
Um, it was put on there as sort of a stopgap because the distributors didn't theoretically want to raise their prices because the fuel was jumping around so much.
Hmm.
And then somewhere along the line, it just became an industry standard. I don't like it. I think having come from the business side where I had P&L responsibilities, it's just become a profit center. It was intended for different reasons, and I'm not a fan of it. But
Yeah.
it can be negotiated out. And when we start talking about contracts and what's
Well,
and
that's the
whatever,
next.
yeah,
Well, yeah, that's the next hot topic that we're
right,
going to get into is, how do we navigate food contracts? That's, I feel like it's such a game of chess, because do you want an NDA that is pricing like some of these really big companies where you lock in certain your top 10 with a certain percent, or do you go with a better rebate, or do you go with the better bottom line price? And, or is it better to just negotiate each location as one contract? So, why don't you talk about the contract itself, and how you've worked in the past with all different companies to get the best buying power and the best pricing for your clients?
yeah. Back years ago, very very few people outside of the big national chains and some healthcare were actually on contracts inside food service. But more and more now, you have a lot of independent groups growing, and it's more common. Still not, still sort of rare. Most people aren't on contracts, but more common to have people on pricing contracts through distribution. Um, you can slice it a lot of different ways. You could have rebate money within there. I mean, there's things called prepaids now. That's become a more normalized kind of thing where a distributor will actually pay for business, and you can get upfront money now.
Yeah. Almost like a
There's
sign-on bonus.
yeah,
It's like playing
and
a
you
major sport. You get a sign-on bonus.
yeah, and you think of it that way, right? But it's a little misleading because it's never really fully explained to people. So what you're doing is you're paying for the sales up front as a distributor, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
So if you make an agreement that over 5 years you're going to buy $2 million a year, and you're going to over that time buy $10 million, at the agreed upon margins, and we can talk about what that means a little bit too.
Right.
Um, you're obligated to that money, and if you take any prepaid rebate up front, if you don't hit that mark at the end, you're obligated to pay a prorated portion of that back. And a lot of people don't understand that. I've seen that many, many times over the years where,
Hmm.
it's sort of sold to people as a a signing bonus, and
Yeah,
it's
until
really
you read the
really
small print.
yeah. You have to really pay attention and have somebody look at these contracts to understand.
Okay, well,
Um,
you just said something important. Somebody to read the contracts. So, when do you sign and when do you walk away? I mean, we're very lucky that you work with us and you help negotiate a lot of that and help the playing field because you have a lot of the experience. So obviously, from our standpoint, being in the restaurant side, it's nice to be able to outsource so we don't have to spend a lot of time reading and really like you talked about fostering relationships. You have those relationships, so we don't have to start from scratch to kind of build that up. So when do you sit down and say, all right, we're ready to sign the contract, and when is it time just to get up and walk away from the table and find somebody else to work with?
Yeah, I think. Well, first of all, I think it's always good to look at every possibility out there. There's always that desire to stay with an incumbent. They've been doing good work with you, but if they're not willing to do the best, then I think in the world we're in now, where the three big ones certainly are all act and behave and have the same products, it's very similar.
Hmm.
And we could talk about some of the regional players in a little bit because they're a little bit different.
Right.
But if you have anywhere from four to upward either different concepts or locations within one concept, you should be on some kind of a purchasing contract now
Yeah.
with your vendor. And a little bit of the watch outs are, you
Yeah,
know,
like what are those red flags? So like when that contract comes down and I mean you read a lot of them before we get them. So this way you can kind of filter out the red flags. What would those red flags be that the listeners that are in the restaurant industry can look for when they're reading vendor agreements?
yeah. So I've seen all types.
Oh, I'm sure
Whether
you have.
whether it was the companies I was working for, where we were writing the
Yeah.
contracts and reviewing them, or just dealing with different ones out in the market over the years that people had presented to them. They're all different. Even within one vendor, you might see like three different variations of a contract, and I'm not always sure why. But some of the call outs, are definitely you want to have audit rights.
Yeah.
So, what's the point of having a contract if you can't audit it and check on them? Now, I believe their intent is always, if it's a good contract, to honor it and do the right thing, but things get missed, right? So you want to be able to audit that contract a couple times a year. There's usually parameters. You're not auditing everything. It's usually like 20 items over a 2 week period, but you
Yeah,
want
when you
to
say
do that.
so, John, when you say audit, what type of things are we auditing? Because not everybody might know all these lingos when we're, for the listeners. Why don't you talk a little bit about what you look for when you're auditing these big vendors?
Yeah, that's a good point. And we'll talk about one of the other call outs was just making sure you have a clear definition of cost, which
Hmm.
I'm going to talk about now, right?
Yeah,
So
right.
you'll get a margin schedule typically inside one of these contracts by category. And what you want to make sure is that's written over the PO cost into that distributor. So that can either be with or without freight, but you want to make sure that whatever the invoice that distributor is getting from their vendors, right, from the manufacturers, is what the cost basis is. I've seen very vague at best examples of this where I couldn't in good conscience have somebody sign it because I don't believe it's really their true cost how they're representing it.
Yeah.
But getting back to the audit,
Hmm.
that's when you would see that for sure, right? Because in all the cases, they're going to give you a copy or at least present to you a copy of the vendor invoice that they used to price your invoice. So let's just say we picked 20 items, we did it over a 2 week period. We actually give them the invoice number, the item number that we want to check on, and they'll provide the invoice from a Heinz or a Lamb Wesson or wherever, and
Right.
we'll get to see that invoice. We'll make sure the date is proper and corresponds to what product they should have been using to price off of at that time, and we just make sure it's right. And again, usually the results are pretty good. You'll find things here and there, but
Now, what happens when you're doing this audit if you find things that are like a red flag and you go, well, wait a second, that's not what we signed? Or, back in the day, and you remember this, they go to, you come to the table and they're giving you like, oh, well, here's a pie chart and these are your
right,
top 10, but what about the other 50? Because the top 10 are priced really, really well, but like the last 10 or,
yeah,
the last 10 on the top 100 are they gouge you. Like I remember seeing something on one of the invoices, and you remember this, where it was like a chemical that should have been $19 and it was like $119 or
Oh,
something
yeah.
crazy because they make it. I mean, look, everybody knows it's all a game. If
Yeah.
you save in one place, you got to pay in the other. So, what's the common mistake, or what would you give as a suggestion of how do you navigate that? Because I mean, there's going to be a loss and a gain. So how do you get to a point where there's like a happy medium where everybody wins? The vendor's happy and the restaurateur's happy.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the key, right? And I plan to talk about that a little bit. Like, what can you do to be a good customer to a vendor, and
Right.
what can the vendor do to be good to you? Getting back to like that top 10 thing, right? Like
Yeah.
that's always a little bit of a double-edged sword. And it's funny, back years ago, I had a guy that I worked for, and he would tell me that, customers only know their top 10 items, right? They only know the cost on the top 10. I still believe that's probably true, right? If you're a pizza place, right, or an Italian restaurant, you know where cheese should
Cheese,
be,
right?
tomatoes,
Tomatoes,
flour,
oil, exactly.
right? But you don't know what, a gallon of milk or a broom or anything else costs, right? So you're in you know, that scary place where if you're not on a contract, you're getting great pricing on your top items, but you don't have no idea what's happening to the rest of them,
For
right?
the rest of it.
When I first left distribution, I started working with. There was a time that was very limited in what I could do initially, so I worked with somebody who I'd known over the years, and they were on a contract, right? That's what they told me. We're on a contract. And I said, okay, let me look at it. So I took it, and it was a contract of sorts. It was one of those very vague ones that we talked about earlier. And they had specific margins on their top 15 items, I think it was.
Hmm.
Right. But when we did a real full analysis and put them on a real contract with the same vendor, the savings was, I think, $56,000 a year, right, across 3 units.
Uh-huh.
So, they did have great pricing on the top 10, but at the end of the day, that didn't drive everything. Even though, people talk about that 80/20 rule, it's a little funny when you talk about restaurant spend.
Yeah. So that was one of my questions. I knew you were going to bring up 80/20. So why don't you explain what 80/20 means?
Right. So it's, the old motto, and it goes with almost every kind of sales situation, or, anything that happens inside your business, is that 80% of the, in this case, 80% of your spend is in the top 20% of your items. Right. And
Yep.
it's mostly true, but once you dig underneath it, there's always some nuance there. And in most cases, I find it's better to be on a full contract. And you could do things inside contracts, and we've done this before, even with you, where we still call out the top items, right?
Right.
We still
Uh-huh.
ask for a better margin on the top items, and that makes sense. But then we still have control of the bottom, right?
Yeah.
Because if you don't have that, the bottom is where they'll make moves. And everybody's been through this that's ever bought in a restaurant, right? You get great pricing in the beginning, right? When they want your
When they want
business,
your business.
and then you stop paying attention, and 6, 7 months later, you're right back where you were,
Yeah.
because you're busy running your restaurant. And I think the best thing about having your spend contracted and looked at is you can just get busy running your business. This is a big worry for people that, they're getting taken advantage of on their purchasing. And at least if you can have some form of understanding of what that's going to be and consistency and make the agreement, you move on and you just work on the business.
Yeah. So let's talk about, you brought up a couple things. So we talked about margins, we talked about food cost. Let's jump into menu impact. So would you suggest using your purchasing power and your food cost? Obviously, you want to improve your food cost, but as a chef, and I'm not talking so much fast casual because you can't really control fast casual as much, but full service you can, because
Mhm.
as a chef, if there's a special or there's better buying power, price stability, or things going on, you can change your menu. So
Yeah,
there's menu engineering for better buying power. Now,
that's right.
that's great for full service, but what do you do in a fast casual setting when you can't change the menu as often?
Yeah, I think like so already if you're looking at contracting, you're kind of trying to act a little bit like a national chain might, right?
Uh-huh.
You're thinking in that direction. And what you'll see medium-sized groups and large chains do is what they call LTOs, right? Limited time
Limited time offering.
offers,
Yeah. Mhm.
right? So, if you have enough concepts, or even if you have a couple concepts, you could still do it. What you want to do, and these aren't specials, right? These aren't yeah, it used to be in the day a special was like a good deal for these are items that the customer's still paying like relatively full price or even extra for. It's funny. I was at Chipotle last night with my son, and I got that that red extra sauce that they have now, and it was like $1 extra, but like that's an LTO, right? That's
Uh-huh.
something you're doing above and beyond. And you talk about the market and cost of goods. We're in a very strange time, in my opinion, on food and inflation. And it was everything was bad a year ago, or 2 years ago, or 3 years ago. Food had grown just to places I hadn't seen it. But dairy right
Everything, but everything did.
yeah.
COVID, I think every episode I've done since I started this podcast, somebody has brought up COVID and
Mhm.
how the world has changed.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's
Cost, housing, fuel, buying power, food, restaurants,
yeah.
outdoor dining. I mean, every single topic, every show,
Yeah.
someone has brought hiring, staffing. I mean, it's crazy.
Well, it is. It's like, back in the day, like selling like pizza in your case, you could make, you were just, it was flour and dough and cheese and everything was cheap. And, a lot of people bought it and you made
Not
money, right?
anymore.
And now there's just pressure on everything. And, like, for instance, like right now, if you have beef on your menu, like you're just losing money. If you have beef on your menu, it's so expensive. Almost anything that has beef in it.
Yeah, well, it was like that one I remember chicken wings at one point.
Yeah.
What were they? They were so ridiculous. It was like,
This
what are they putting gold in the chicken
Yeah,
bones? I
like this time
mean,
last year, I think chicken wings were
oh
$130
yeah,
a case. I could be a little off with that, but they were very high. But right now, chicken wings are, $60 a case, right?
yeah.
And people took them off their menu. Like they just took them off. So right now, like what I would suggest is people look at,
Yeah, but how can you so let me cut you off for a second, but
yeah,
what if you're like Wingstop? How can you take chicken wings off your menu? Like, there's concepts out there that
yeah,
100% rely on that product.
right.
So,
You
same
can't.
thing for beef. Like, what if you're a burger joint? You can't just say, "Oh, we're not gonna sell it."
Yep. Well, so this is where the LTOs come in, I guess, right? So what you want to do is you want to find items seasonally that either, historically hit lows, right? Like chicken tends to get expensive during like football season, right? Chicken wings, you don't want to
Mhm.
do a wing LTO then. But if you can find, and that's where I help people too, right? I get in there and I look at the markets, I see what's good. And if you can be a little bit in front of it and look at, there's all kinds of reporting that you can see seasonally when things drop, at least historically. Some of that gets blown out of the water with, things that go on with the economy, et cetera. But,
Right.
you want to run LTOs where they're money makers, right? And you probably saw this with, people, again, chicken wings are crazy, but breast meat was never as bad. So people went to boneless wings,
Boneless,
right?
called bone
Boneless wings only
we
exist
call them
because
boneless chicken bites.
right, because
You
chicken
get
wings became
creative.
so expensive. So what you want to do is you want to run LTOs where you can, or specials, to drive your customers into new things and also away from things that are just not good profit centers for you anymore.
Yeah.
Depending on how things are. So
Let me ask you a
um,
question. So if you are under contract, so let's say, you sign this NDA, you have this national contract, you're on a set pricing, can you go back and renegotiate pricing within the contract? So let's say you lock in a certain number. Let's just say tomatoes are $20 a case, which they're not anymore, but I'm just throwing a number. But let's just say, you're buying at $20 a case. And now all of a sudden, you lock in that if they go up to 28, you're locked in, but now they're running 22.
right,
Can you go back and renegotiate those numbers? Because obviously you don't want to pay a higher price because that's what your contract says, but now they're much lower, and they're lower because you might have friends in the industry or your friend next door is buying at X, and now what do you do there? Can you go back and renegotiate, or are you stuck in that contract?
Yeah, it's a little bit tough. I think it depends on what you're talking about. So, like commodities. So, take like oil, right?
Hmm.
Oil is a good example, right? If you want to contract oil, there's companies that will do it, but they're looking forward on the market, so they're locking you into a market. It's a little bit like speculatory, right?
So
So,
is it almost like forecasting where they look
yeah,
at, is it a price stable item or is it a forecasted?
it's a little bit of
Yeah.
both. So you can stabilize it for yourself, even if it's not the best price. You're stabilizing it, so you have a known for 6 months, let's just say.
Uh-huh.
And if the price goes up, you're protected. If the price goes down, you still have a known. You've locked it in. You've based everything you're doing on that.
Right.
But it could be that you're paying over the market, and that's a little tricky with commodities.
Yeah.
And a lot of companies have got away from that. Like some of the producers on pork and meatballs and things like that. They used to do 6 month contracts on their pricing. They're all month to month now, especially anything that has beef in it. It's all month to month.
Hmm.
But this is probably a good time to talk about it. So outside of the contract you have with a distributor, that's just what they're paying and what they're marking it up
Are
to.
you going to bring up rebates?
Yeah, because there's a whole world of opportunity out there with the manufacturers. I used to say it's like the last place there's still money left after a contract to kind of squeeze a little more out for the operator.
Right.
So, on the items that you have a lot of volume in, it's good to go to those manufacturers and negotiate a outside of distribution agreement, and that can come in the form of you can get money back directly to you as a check quarterly, or you can get what's called an off invoice allowance that they'll send to the distributor, and they'll just mark, like if you get, let's just say you have like pepperoni and you have a deal with the manufacturer,
Uh-huh.
they can give you like a $4 discount, right? And they'll just reduce it by $4 into your invoice. So at the store level, you can get $4 off, right? And that doesn't
Exactly.
affect the distributor at all, which is nice, right? They're still making their money inside their agreement, but you've then gone outside of that based on your purchasing power within certain lines and
Right.
taken advantage of that.
So let me ask you a question. So I mean, obviously rebates are such a hot topic because that's, like you said, the only other place where you can actually squeeze
Yeah.
a little bit more money. But does the restaurateur go to the individual vendors? Because you have to remember, you can go back to a US Food or Cisco and do rebates within your large vendor, but you can also go outside your large vendor and go to like chicken or
Mhm.
paper or, like we do flour and oil
Yep.
and meatballs. So there's so many different ways. And then there's also marketing money. I know when we work with Grande Cheese, they're not a rebate type vendor, but there's also marketing dollars they'll throw into menus and menu printing and mailers. And so there's a lot of different ways to find free money. But here's the big question. You find free money, but is it a trap? I mean, what are the things you have to look for? Because yes, we always say nothing's ever free. So if there's free money,
Right.
catch, right?
It's interesting. I tend to agree when it comes to the distributor, right? That's like we talked about with the prepaid money, or let's just say you get some people, oh, I get 3% rebate back from the my distributor. Yeah, but you're paying for that in your pricing, right? Even in a contract world, right? So if you get 3% back, it's probably 3% more in your margin structure than it would be if you didn't have it, right? To,
Right.
to me, I always look at contracts with distributors. It's just a math equation, right? I know the bottom, like just from just because I do, how low that the total math equation can get, and then however you want to do it, you can do it, whether you want rebates or you just want it in your pricing, but it is what it is there. In the world of the manufacturers, that really is just free money. Like there's no there. There's nothing to find that you're getting into a trap.
Yeah.
It's just they have money allocated for that. And it's just funny. It doesn't.
But isn't that built into the price? I mean, because you have to think about it, just like you
Yeah.
buy a cost, okay? If
Yep.
a shirt is $3 and that's what it costs to make, and it's
Mhm.
$3, there's a markup. So if it's $3 cost to them and they're going to sell it to you for 5, and
Yep.
let's just say they're going to put in a $2 rebate, so now they're going to sell it to you for 7, it's already kind of built in there anyway. So
Yeah,
you're already buying higher to get $2 back.
yeah, but here's the thing: it's built in for the people that buy one or two, right? So they know that they had, and not everybody asks, but somewhere in their business plan, they know that somebody that buys 50 of something a week is going to eventually ask for a better price, right?
Right.
So the ones that buy one and two and three or whatever, their prices are relatively inflated to allow for the eventuality that they're going to have to come back at some point and give deals to the people that need it, that
Mhm.
deserve it, right? That makes sense.
Yep. Yep, for sure.
You
So,
know,
John, you're not going to believe this, but we are almost done this show. Every guest I have on my podcast, we get into talking about so many things, and then we're like, wow,
yeah,
where did 40 minutes go? So, we have to answer a couple quick questions before we run out of time.
sure, go ahead.
So I'm going to rapid fire a couple questions for you. But before we do that, can you just talk a couple minutes about the future of restaurant purchasing? I mean, what do you think 2026 looks like? I mean, is there a trend up, a trend down? What can you give to the to listeners and operators to prepare now for? I mean, obviously you don't have a crystal ball, but you might
Yeah.
have some suggestions that we can start looking at now for 26.
Well, I guess the first thing I would say is take a look at all this stuff. Think about how you're buying. So you know the main players in food distribution are all public companies now, right? And with that comes shareholder pressure to be profitable.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that's fine. That's what they do, right? All you're in it for profits too. But the national accounts that are out there in healthcare and these big purchasers are, they're trying to drive their pricing down too. So if I had a call out to the independent restaurants out there, which is where our world is here,
Right.
is the pressure is going to be to increase profits there from their side to balance it out. It's been that way for a long time, right? As that
Mhm.
as that volume is high and the pressure is to lower the margins there, it has to come from somewhere to keep things even. So I'd be diligent. Nobody knows what's going to happen with the food costs out there. I think likely we'll see things level out a little bit, like happened with dairy and what happened with poultry.
Mm-hmm.
Beef
Well,
eventually will come.
markets always change. I mean, in terms of, the food,
Yeah,
it
yeah,
depends on, is there a famine, or the
oh
chicken's
yeah,
getting sick, bird flu,
yeah,
what's the weather like? I mean, it's just
right.
crazy how many things can affect
Yeah. Well,
just food.
interestingly, the main driver of it is fuel.
Yeah.
It comes down to feed. Like if gas is cheap, more corn goes into feed that goes into ethanol. I mean, we could probably have a whole economic call another time about things like that. But
Yeah.
I think things will get better. But I would just tell people to be intentional. Think about get advice on things and try to get into stable contracted situations if you have the ability to with your volume. And like we talked about LTOs, do
Yeah.
it. Like start selling things that you're making money on intentionally and drive your customer base away from the things where you're not.
Right. All right. So, what's your number one golden rule for better buying and better margins? Is there one?
Well, I think it's funny. I think if you have a good line of sight on when you become eligible for things like contracts. If you're anywhere from two to and you're growing and you're going to have four or five, you should be talking to your distributor about being on some kind of a contract. But then don't just let them put you on whatever contract they say you should be on. Either go out and seek some advice on it or on
Do your
your own
research.
do your research, get some different offers from some other distributors, and just look at what's out there. You
Yeah. Well,
control
what do
it.
they always say? Shop it, get three estimates. I mean, we say that in every industry, three
Right.
estimates from an electrician, three estimates from a plumber. You definitely get,
Exactly.
a couple estimates from your food vendors. They're
Yeah.
all out there. And, before we end the show and we talk and we wrap up, you mentioned two things that I think are important. You have these large purveyors like US Food and Cisco, but then you also have regional.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to reach out to them as well. They want your business, and I can't tell how many people knock on our door. Steve in my office. He was in Edgewater yesterday, and there was a group out of Jersey that walked in that wants the business. So it
Yeah.
happens all the time. And, like you said, it's definitely reviewing the contracts, finding the best price, and shopping it.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with regional distributors. They're family run for the most part. They have pretty good purchasing power because they're, there's they belong to networks like Unipro out there and DMA where they're grouping their purchasing power together, just like other people do, and they're good alternatives with really good service. But just make sure. I guess the last thing I'll leave you on, as far as if you're looking at a contract, the margin schedule is just the margin schedule. You can't look at two documents next to each other and base your decision on those numbers, because until you actually have them put pricing to it, like what their pricing would be at that, and do a really thorough analysis on everything you buy against it,
Yeah.
you won't have a true picture, because they all operate, even the three big ones operate slightly differently in how they build behind the scenes. And that's where you would probably seek some advice and try to get some help.
Well, with that, for everybody listening, can you let everybody know where to find you? Is it an
Yeah,
email, or do you have a website? Just so for anybody listening that's in the restaurant industry or just wants some consulting tips.
sure. And anybody can call me. I'm happy to help. My goal out there is to help people in the independent restaurant space compete. So
Yeah.
my,
Well, you
my,
know what we'll
my
do
email.
after, yeah, what we'll do after the show, I'll go ahead and I'll post in the notes where to find you.
Sure.
And for everybody listening, our DMs are open. We love to hear from you. We always love new questions and new topics. You can feel free to DM through Instagram, or you can email me at restaurantdiva.com. But John, before we go, New Year's resolution, anything that you want to change in 2026? I've been asking everybody. Is it health?
um, yeah, I think it does. Yeah, I need to lose 20 pounds. So that's my
I
that's
think
my
everybody
goal.
says that.
That's
I
my
need to
goal.
lose weight.
No, well, I've been at it, so I'm working on it. But that's my new goal for the next year. So we'll
Well, you
see
know what? It's got to be hard. You're always out there tasting
how.
new
I
samples and
know.
meeting with new vendors. And, Jannar used to say that even when he was working with, putting together the chicken concept, I think he ate more fried chicken than anybody could have, and chicken tenders and mac and cheese for the last year and a half. You know what I
It's
mean? So
true. Well,
you're
you're
thinking
right. Like,
going strong.
yesterday, I had to have like the broker people bring beignets to somebody. So of course,
Of
I
course, you have to have a beignet.
ate beignets, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah. Thanks
It
for
always
having
goes
me.
so fast. And for everybody listening, that's another episode of Dine and Dish. And we'll be talking to you next week. Have a great week. And we'll look forward to, oh my goodness, it's Christmas in a week and then New Year's. So we have lots of great topics and lots of great shows. And until next time, see you soon.